Well, welcome to another new year. We add them on, and it's amazing actually how they add up. I know for one. Let us pray. Let us fill our hearts with Jesus Christ and proclaim praise for the love that is shown to us through the words and the actions of Him. And may these words tonight be acceptable to you, Lord, in the knowledge that I offer them to you as an expression of our love and all our understanding. Amen. Amen. When I was younger, there was a comedian. Some of you might remember Max Bygraves. And he used to start with, "I'm going to tell you a story." Well, tonight I'm going to tell you a story, and it's my story. I actually almost was an immigrant. 1939, and the Germans were moving across France. My mother was in Guernsey, one of the Channel Islands. She was pregnant with me, and she was forced to leave and come to the mainland. So she was evacuated. Consequences were, I was born in England, so I only had one passport. I was born in Southampton. That was 1939. By then, the war was actually creeping closer and closer to us. And I was taken all over England for different reasons that I'll explain a little later. My mother, as I say, had me in Southampton. And about 2.5 years later, she had my brother, Michael, my first brother. And as you all know, I've got 6 brothers and 6 sisters now. And Dad wants a football team, as everybody keeps reminding me. Anyway, we moved to Portsmouth. That's when my brother was born. And my mother recounted to me the story that she was pushing the pram with the 2 of us along the cliffs at Portsmouth. And suddenly a Messerschmitt came down and machine gunned the path she was on. She picked us up, or I think she tipped us into the bushes with the pram, and the guns went across. We got out of that unscathed. We then sort of moved up to Lincolnshire, and we lived in Lincolnshire and around that area, Skellingthorpe, etc., etc. And I can remember in Lincolnshire, by that time I was 3.5, 4 years old, and it's strange how things stay in your memory, even at that age. We were in a terrace house, and this was just outside Lincoln, and Lincoln is well known for its small airports, and because the RAF was based and scattered around that area. Anyway, we were in there one evening. My mother heard this noise going across, this rumble and roar, and it was a V2 rocket. And if you don't know, when a rocket goes across and the engines stop, then there'll be a whistling noise and it would land and explode anywhere within 20-mile radius. My mother grabbed us too, dragged us under the kitchen table, which was a thick oak table, and I can remember she had a tablecloth with tassels on it, and she pulled the tablecloth down. Not that it would have done much good. And at that instance, there was this massive explosion, and the ceiling came down on us. We crawled out of it, and what had happened, it had hit the house next door. So we crawled out of that alive and just carried on with our lives. This is something I think about occasionally. When I read about these immigrants who have made that awful trip across the Mediterranean and across several countries to escape bombing and having their lives shattered. We were close to it, but you know, we must think and pray for those people who have got nothing in their lives, but they keep going. We had nothing. We then I can remember one particular time we lived in a mitten hut. The mitten hut is corrugated iron and it's curved. We virtually had this mitten hut to ourselves. By that time I had another brother. So there were 3 of us and my mother, 4 of us. And I used to go into the wood at the back and pick up the fir cones and put them into the stove. And to this day I can still remember the smell of burning fir and the fir cones itself, the oil. And it's lovely, it's a lovely, lovely stove. 1947 was the coldest winter known before then. And we had snow 6 or 7 feet high. I can remember my father carrying me on his shoulders, walking across the field, and all I could see was the church spires sticking up above the snow. That time that my parents decided, because my father had come back out of the army, we decided to go back to the Channel Islands. So we went back to Guernsey and started up our life again there. I won a scholarship to grammar school, and while I was at grammar school, my first, I suppose, brainwave, business brainwave, sort of came to me. By that time we had a large family, and I used to work at the weekends in a furniture store, setting up their displays on the windows, and in the evenings during the week I would actually go to evening classes twice a week to study, display and art, etc. I was 14 years old then. I got paid 5 shillings for Saturday and Sunday's work, which my father took. Unbeknown to him, my father, by the way, was an ex-sergeant major, very, very strict. He brought us up very strict, and we had problems with him. I mean, he used to beat us up. I think it was the only way he thought he would keep all of us in control. Anyway, I wanted to get away. I was coming up to 15, and I was trying to work out how on earth I could make some money. Well, in those days, we used to have marble floor covering, which was rubber. It was quite thick rubber, and the bathrooms used to be fitted out with this floor covering. And of course, working in a furniture store, we had a lino department. I don't know about lino nowadays. I think a lot of the youngsters probably don't even know what lino is. But I asked the fitters to save the offcuts for me. So when I used to go and work at weekends, I would actually take these samples and actually cut them into 6-inch squares. I'd have 6 of these squares and 2 large ones, which were table mats. And I used to wrap them up in cellophane. And on my way down from the grammar school to the swimming pool, which was outside, it was on the coast, I used to knock on people's doors and say, "Can I sell you a set of placemats, please? 5 shillings. So I used to get quite a few 5 shillings. And I saved them up. And this was, my father never knew, or my mother never even knew about this. 1953, Queen's coronation. There was a competition between all the major stores in the south of England for best window display. Well, I designed this window display using the same carpet that they had at the coronation, which had been sent to various stores, and our store bought some. And I had like a magic carpet of this royal carpet with the crown and whatever. Anyway, the long and the short was, 14 and a half, I won the Southern Area Championship. And to give me a certificate and the prize was a director of Yardies, the perfumery people. He came over to Guernsey for other reasons, not just that. But I went to the Royal Hotel, massive hotel. We didn't dare step over the step before that. And he presented this to me. And when he did, he said, "Robert, you've got some talent. When you come to England, let me know, and I'll get you a job." So, past my 15th birthday, and I'd saved up enough to buy a horrible suit, a brown suit. I don't know why. I had bright red hair in those days. And a brown suit, thinking of it is terrible. Anyway, and a suitcase. And these were being looked after by one of the staff at Brennan's, where I worked. And she knew what was going on, so correspondence was also being sent to her. And the result was, I'd fixed a date when I was going to go. I bought a ticket on the boat to go to the mainland. It cost me £6. £6 one way. They used to call them the cattle boats. And they were greasy, oily boats. Used to get seasick. Anyway, I actually left on the Saturday I was leaving. I actually thought to myself, I can't go without just not telling my mother. And I can remember I went downstairs and I said, Mum, I'm going away to London tomorrow. She was ironing away. She looked up and said, you can't, you've got to tell your father. I said, I can't, that's why I'm going. She said, I know. She said, but you've still got to tell your father. Well, I was booked on the 5 o'clock boat the following day. Father came in late at night. Mother said, Bob wants to have a word with you. So we sat down and I said, and he looked at me aghast. He never thought that I had the ability to actually do something like that. But the long and short was, he agreed, said, okay, you go then, he said, but I'll pay your fare if it doesn't work out for you to come back to the Shamrons. So I got on the boat on my own and landed up in the UK, got interviews for 4 jobs, and in those days, unlike it is now, I had 4 jobs offered me. And I ended up at Whiteley's in London, working in their display department. I'd only been here 6 months, and I was staying in a hostel, and I ended up, doubled up, I thought, with appendicitis. Not 16, which was the legal age. They had to ring my mother and father to get permission to operate. I'd been rushed into hospital. And they said, fine. By the next day, it turned out that it wasn't appendicitis, I had hepatitis. And I had it quite serious. I ended up convalescence home. Anyway, we'll get over that. From working at Whiteley's, I moved on to Heels. Now, Heels is a very famous store in Tottenham Court Road. Very well known for its design and modern furniture. Has a brilliant reputation. And I ended up working there, and then my national service came along. Now, national service, the youngsters don't know, but it was compulsory. It was the end, coming to the end of when it was going to be compulsory. If I'd gone home and stayed there 6 months, I could have avoided it. But my father was in the army, and I wanted to actually experience it. So we got called up, and I ended up as a special operator in the Royal Corps of Signals. And I was receiving high-speed Morse, and the Cold War was happening in those days, and we were intercepting secret messages that were being sent across the Russian borders, and the messages between the tanks and everything else. And we were intercepting that, and it was my job, amongst others, to actually receive this high-speed Morse and work with intelligence in deciphering these messages. So when that finished, I went back to my job, because by law, they had to keep your job open. Went back to Heels, and then I wondered how I could start a business. I still had this entrepreneurial sort of attitude. I didn't want to work for anybody. So the most important thing was accommodation. So I walked around London looking for a basement. And I found this huge basement underneath 2 blocks of flats in North London, in Highgate, that had been condemned. The doors were sealed up. I knocked on the first floor, asked Mr. Griffiths, if we've got a flat there. She said, can't go down there, she said, there's rats. I said, well, I'd still like to see, if you don't mind. So I walked through her flat and down steps, and there was lawns at the back. And this downstairs, there was these 6 rooms, and they were huge. No floors, the floors were rotted and they were tumbled through. There was 1 sink with a basin, and they were originally servants' quarters in about the 1850s, and had been left in the 1930s to rot and ruin. The walls, the plaster was dropping off. Anyway, I said, this is ideal. I could start a business here. So I went back and she said, you can't do that. I said, well, can you tell me who owns it? She said, yes, a gentleman. So an appointment was made with the planning officer of the council because there was a condemned order on it and it's uninhabitable. We met up. I was 20 years old and they looked at me and I'd done drawings, everything else. I said, I want to do this, this and this. And they were quite aghast. They said, young man, do you know what you're taking on? I said, yes, I think so. Anyway, we ended up agreeing that I could have it for £1 a month for 3 years. The condition was that it had to be habitable by that time and all the work and things that I proposed to do would be finished. I said, great. I moved in on a Sunday with 2 tea chests, some boards and a camp bed, a methylated spirits heater, and there was a larder there with slate shelves because this was before the time of refrigerators. Slate shelves, and I remember I had the Bunsen burners and everything else and the heaters and that. And the only heating was an oil stove, one of these round ones with the grill on top with a wick used light. Fortunately, it was in the summer, so it wasn't too bad. Anyway, I ended up working, learning to plaster, learning to plumb. I did all the plumbing, learning to do electrics, which fortunately I knew a bit about because my father was an electrician as well, and I used to help him wire houses when I was younger. And so I learned all the trades, went to scrap merchants and got timber to lay on the floors while I was still working at Heels, so the money I had coming in from that helped me to develop. 6 rooms. So 2 of them first of all were habitable, the other ones I turned into workshops and a billiard room. Had to have a billiard table. And I'd picked up a billiard table at a scrapyard somewhere or other, so I had this huge room with this billiard table in. So I had lots of friends. For our 21st, myself and 3 others who'd been 21 during that particular year, said, right, we'll have a party. So we had a party for 3 days, over 120 people. We had jazz band to play during the night. It was fabulous. Moving on from that, that gave me the chance to start a business. So I started my first business, which was doing displays for ladies' hairdressers. And in those days, if a young lady wanted to go on in business, she would start a hairdresser. North London, you can imagine. And so I ended up with, I think it was 20-odd hairdressing salons, and I used to get 6 guineas. Now, a guinea is £1 and 1 shilling, okay? So 6 guineas multiplied by 20 was a good little income, so every 6 weeks I would move the displays on. So I'd make these displays, large female heads with diamante and papier-mâché hairstyles, all sorts of things. And they were popular. I then moved on to a laundry craft who were in Wales, had a chain of dry cleaning shops, and there was 30 of these shops. By that time I had a van, a white van, a transit, with the name across it, and I used to drive up to Wales and I used to move them around. Again, 6 guineas for each one. From there I moved into designing exhibitions, and I then started employing people, and I did the Ideal Home exhibition. I managed to get a contract with one of the big furnishing stores to actually build there. I had 27 people working for me by that time. Unfortunately, that particular year, electricians decided to go on strike. And everybody went out. I was landed with the salaries for 27 people for 6 weeks and no income coming in. Result was the company collapsed. I couldn't get through that. So then I stood back and said, right, what else can I do? So I got back into my old interior designing. The interior design blossomed. I ended up with my first major client. Oh, I took a showroom in Blandford Street, just off Baker Street. I was on one corner. The Beatles were up there in Paddington Street, and they painted the whole of their offices block with psychedelic paintings. And the council stepped in and said, paint it back. And I was a small showroom, became very successful with that. My first major client was David Frost. And David, by that time, was doing shows. That was the week that was. Some of you might remember them. And also the American show. So he was backwards and forwards. He bought a house in Eccleston Square in Victoria. And I was asked if I would design the interior. From there, I fortunately moved into a lot of his associates in Cavendish Avenue, the Buchanan family who had the whiskey, and Paul McCartney's number 9, and Rod Stewart's at Frognall. I did a flat for him. So I'm dropping names here, but they were all business contacts, and they made the business successful. I then had, at the same time, a record company called iMark Records. iMark Records, I had a few groups in North London came to me, and one group sounded quite good. 2 Irish boys and 2 black boys, we used to call them in those days. We called them the Equals. Now the Equals eventually went on and we had a hit, Baby Come Back. Still being played occasionally on. I also had a group called Concrete Unit 4+2 with Concrete and Clay. So all these things were happening. And I was getting also personal life involved with CHE. Now CHE, if those who do not know, is the Campaign for Homosexual Equality. And it was the first group to be set up, the freedom of homosexual and the way we lived our lives. We were being accepted, but only just. It needed strong support. And so Shay was formed in Windmill Street, and I used to go along the office and we used to I gave them little duplicators. One of these things, a Roneo printer, and it was a stencil you put on a roller and it would print out all the leaflets. And we used to hand those out. Right. That started off. I realised there was a big gap somewhere. I met a young man, well, we were both young in those days, a French guy, Antoine, and Antoine was a trainee chef, Club Metropolitan. And I said, Antoine, what would you like most of all? He said, I'd love a restaurant. So I went out and bought him one, as you do. No, not quite actually like that. What actually happened, I found out a club had been closed down in Earl's Court and the lease was available. So I went along and purchased the lease and the Gemini was born. Now, there are some people I've met here in Brighton who still remember the Gemini. Christmas Day, I used to open it up and for 5 shillings, which is 25p nowadays, you could come and spend Christmas Day and Boxing Day in the restaurant, and everybody had a Christmas gift and we had a television, because in Earl's Court, if you were gay, you lived in bedsits, 1 room normally, with a kitchen associated. And there was a large community, a gay community in Earl's Court in that situation. A lot of them have been thrown out of homes and they're on their own. So the Gemini sort of was a great support. This was 1975. 1982, everything was going fine, and then Antoine was refused to renew his work permit. He had to go back to France. We split up. So I got rid of the restaurant and I moved on. I went to America, and I drove across America from New York right through to San Francisco, selling stained glass windows that came out of Methodist churches that had been demolished, and I knew the owner of the demolition company and made a deal with him that I could have the stained glass and sell it for him. While in America, I came back with the knowledge about electronic displays. You've seen the scrolling displays. And there was a market open there. So I thought, right, how do I get this through? And how are we off for time? I'm not going to go too elaborate on this, but what happened was I got a company in Taiwan, because Taiwan was the China of today. Taiwan made electronics. I shipped them in from Taiwan to Ireland, because the duty was low. Had the signs constructed, they're only small, about this big, that high, and then brought into the UK. And then I employed salesmen to go around selling these at £250 each. And they were the first. They used to hang them up in shop windows, and some of them are still around, actually, funny enough, 30 years. This moved on to bigger things, and Michael came and worked with me when the company moved into doing larger displays, and we worked with two guys, helped to set up a factory in Portsmouth, and HSBC offered us a major contract to open the very first call centre. This is 36 years ago. And I'd got involved with that, and then Michael came on halfway through, and I've got some great photographs of Michael working as we worked through the nights. We used to go into these buildings, and we'd start work at 8 o'clock at night, and work right through the night and install all these cables in between the ceilings and connecting up these message boards. And Michael doesn't like heights, as Chris will tell you. And we were doing a British Gas contract, and there was 50 odd of these signs being installed. And we were on our own in this massive building. And I'd installed these up 12 feet up in the air. We had a cherry picker, one of these vertical ones with like a lift on it. I'd got down, Michael was down on the ground. I said, Michael, I need you to go up there and connect up these cables for me. No way, he says, no way. I said, well, this was 6 in the morning. I had to work on the computers to connect all the systems up. And you couldn't see the look on his face when he realised that if we had to finish tonight, we had to go on it. And I have got a photograph of Michael standing in this box, holding onto the bar, white knuckles, literally, as this machine took him up 12 feet into the air and slightly swaying from side to side. Anyway, we finished it, and that actually grew. The business grew into quite a size, and then I moved on to electronics in a more general way. Highgate, I realised I wanted a rest. I needed to retire. So I came down here. I knew I had to live by the sea, so I had to come back to Brighton. It was in my veins, the sea air. So I came down to Brighton. I shuttled backwards and forwards because I bought a place down here. And after 53 years up in Highgate, I decided that was it, and I retired down here. And while I was in London, I'd got into the Metropolitan Community Church in North London, and I can remember going into this building in Shaftesbury Avenue and realising that I had brothers and sisters here, like-minded, and we felt that this was an exciting time to be. And I can remember actually 1984 going on the parade. You've all seen the film Pride, and the church was represented there. We went on this parade. At the time, I didn't realise the connection with the miners. It wasn't until I saw the film after, well, just recently, did I realise the connection on that. But those days were so exciting. And the work we did with CHE, MCC, it's now developed into acceptance for us all. And I can look back now in all honesty and say they were good times, and I think there's still a lot more good times to come, especially here with the village MCC. And that's my story. Thank you.